Guys, thank you so much. I am so excited to be speaking here at The Rock tonight about story and the power of your story, and just so excited to share this message with you. So let's jump right on into it if we can. So we're going to jump into Luke chapter 8, verses 1 through 4 here. And it says, "Now it came to pass, afterward that he, Jesus, went through every city and village, preaching and bringing the glad tidings of the kingdom of God. And the 12 were with him, and certain women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities, Mary called Magdalene, out of whom had come 7 demons." Now let me stop right there. How many of you in here actually feel like you had an ex-girlfriend that was possessed with like 7 demons at one time in the past? Yeah, you know who you are, exactly. We all had some of those in high school. But the thing about this is true. And this is really, really important. And I'm going to share with you here in just a second why. But remember this, Mary Magdalene, who had been possessed of 7 demons. Why? Because Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward, Susanna, and many others who provided for him for their substance. And when a great multitude had gathered, and they had come to him from every city, he spoke a parable, or he spoke a story. Now, what's important about this, what I want to point out, is Jesus at this time is in Capernaum. He's up in Capernaum, which is right off the Sea of Galilee. And the Sea of Galilee, by the way, is what we call the Dead Sea today. So he's up in Capernaum, and Jesus has been teaching. He's been healing people. He's been doing some different miracles, and people are hearing about him. People are actually hearing about all the things that he's done, and they're coming from every city to come and hear him speak. Now, does anyone in here know what it means when we actually translate every back into the original Aramaic? Does everyone know what every means? Anybody have an idea? It means every, okay? So I want to make that very clear. What we're talking about is every single city. All the people from around, they were thronging to where Jesus was to see him because they had been hearing stories about all the things that he had done. Now, what's important about this, so there's this great multitude, there's all these people that are thronging around him. And I can only imagine myself, I tend to be a skeptic by nature. Here's all these people, Jesus is in the middle, and he's teaching and preaching. I would have been on the outside going, man, I don't know if this is true or not. I don't know if this Jesus guy is for real. Did he really take 1 fish and a few pieces of bread and feed 5,000? Did he really heal this leper that nobody would even dare touch? But now, just now imagine you got Mary Magdalene. She's kind of in the crowd. And I'm talking back behind, I'm going, man, I don't know if this Jesus guy's for real. I don't know if all these stories that I've heard are true. And Mary Magdalene steps up and goes, every one of them are true. And I can tell you, because I had 7 demons and he set me free. Now, first of all, I'd be like, okay, well, that sounds awesome. Let me take a few steps away from you because that freaks me out a little bit. Let's be honest. And I'm like, I really don't want to be too close. But I'd be going, wow, so it's true. So all these stories I'm hearing, they're true. And Mary Magdalene goes, absolutely, they're true. Because of her story. She knew what Jesus had done firsthand. He had set her free from 7 demons. So there was power in story, and Jesus was speaking by parables and story. So that's kind of what's going on. Now, what you also have to realize is this is the pinnacle of Jesus' ministry. He's here in Capernaum teaching and preaching, and all these people are thronging to him. Now, imagine his disciples, okay? His disciples were fishermen. Now, I know most of us guys, we love fishing. We're like, okay, yeah, man, being a professional fisherman, that sounds awesome, right? Okay, how many of you in here would love to be a professional fisherman? Exactly, amen. Okay, you didn't want to back then. It was not cool. You didn't have a 24-foot bass boat, with a 200 horsepower outboard engine with a 60-foot depth finder, okay? I know a couple of you right then just got aroused. It's okay, we understand that's fishing. But back in those days, you didn't have that. Back in those days, you were a fisherman because you weren't qualified to do anything else. You were a fisherman because you were as low as it gets. You had to go out and sweat all day long in the sun, out on the middle of the water. Your skin would just become dark and dark and dark because you were out fishing all day long and you smelled like nasty fish. Fishermen were not someone to be respected and revered. They were pretty low on the totem pole. And that's who most of Jesus' disciples were. They didn't have a great story, okay? They were fishermen. But now all of a sudden, they're with Jesus and they're kind of being lifted up. They're being taken care of. They're actually being respected. People are putting them up in their house, giving them food. They're like, hey man, you travel around with Jesus. Let's hear about him. Is he the real deal? Is he for real? All these things that we keep hearing about, is it real? And all the disciples are going, absolutely. Let me tell you what I've seen with my own two eyes. Let me tell you a story about what Jesus did. So now things are incredible. Things are going really, really well in Capernaum. And then all of a sudden, Jesus down in verse 22, it says, now it happened on a certain day that he got into his boat with his disciples and he said to them, let us cross over the other side of the lake. And they launched out. Jesus just all of a sudden, and this is true Jesus fashion, he just all of a sudden goes, hey guys, let's leave. Let's sail across the other side of the lake. Now Jesus calls it a lake. We call it the Sea of Galilee. We call it the Dead Sea. Okay, it's a little bigger than Lake Arcadia or something like that. This is the Sea of Galilee. Now what's important about that is, first of all, the disciples had to be going, why? Why are we leaving? Things are really, really good here. We're being taken care of, respected, lifted up. Jesus, people are coming all over to hear from you. Why in the world are we leaving? But they probably thought because whatever's on the other side must be bigger. It must be better. If we've got thousands of people coming to us over here, then there's got to be 10,000s coming down here. But the other thing that we miss in this is when Jesus said we're going to sail across the lake, they were going to leave Capernaum and they're sailing down to Gadara. Nobody ever sailed across the Sea of Galilee. It was a death sentence. We think about that today and we're like, why? Why is it such a big deal? If you look at the geography from where the Dead Sea today sits, it sits down in a valley, down this Kidron Valley. It's very low elevation. And right next to it, to the west, are all these mountains. Mount Ararat and a lot of the different places in the Bible that a lot of us have probably heard about. And on the other side of that is the Mediterranean Sea. So we know this in Oklahoma really well. But what happens when you get air that comes from the sea up over the mountains, it's cooled, and then immediately drops down into hot, warm air down in a valley? What do we get? We get storms, we get tornadoes, we get nasty thunderstorms, nasty weather. Now, once again, you're in a 26-foot bass boat, no big deal. You just hit it and you go. They were in little wooden dinghies that they made with underwear as their sail, okay? These were not high-end, state-of-the-art, nice bass boats. So you were dead. If you got caught out in a storm in the middle of the Sea of Galilee when you were a fisherman, you were dead. You couldn't row back. The winds would start to change. It would actually a lot of times blow you further out. And I'm going to prove this to you. When Jesus called Peter to come and follow him, to be his disciple, and he said, cast your nets in and, get the fish, where was Jesus standing? On the shore. Where was Peter? He was out fishing. And that story happened twice. Once when he first called him, and then after Jesus was crucified and resurrected, he called to Peter a second time, and Peter jumped out of the boat and swam to the shore. In those days, fishermen would never sail out further than what they could swim back. Because if a storm came on very quick, you couldn't see it coming over the mountains. As soon as it hit, they a lot of times would leave their nets, leave their boats, and literally jump in the water and swim to shore. So when Jesus said, we need to get in the boat and sail to the other side, the disciples were like, what? Jesus, now, let me get this right. I know you're like a really good carpenter, okay? I'm sure you make a great entertainment center and all, okay? I'm sure you're good at what you do. But apparently, you're not a meteorologist or a fisherman. So we're going to tell you what happens here. You don't sail across the Sea of Galilee. It's a death sentence. This makes Gilligan's Island look like a cruise, okay? So they did, though. Jesus goes, no, we're going to sail across to the other side. Now, here's the funny part. What happens? They sail across, and a massive storm comes up. They're freaking out. I can only imagine Peter going, I told you so. This is why you don't sail across the Sea of Galilee. So all of a sudden, the storm comes up. They're all freaking out. Jesus is sleeping. So they wake him up, and Jesus, of course, he calms the storm. With nothing more than a word, he calms the storm. And they are amazed. They're amazed. Now I can imagine that story. Imagine Peter, imagine John, imagine any of these disciples later on, and they're talking to someone and they go, man, we left Capernaum and we're sailing across to Gadara. And someone would have been like, whoa, you did what? And he's like, I know, right? That's crazy. You don't sail across like that. And guess what? A storm came up. We were about to die. That is like the coolest story in history. Guys, we love stories where we almost die. I don't know what it is. It's sick and twisted, but we love stories where we almost die. So here's one of those stories, and Jesus literally calms it. So now I can imagine the disciples going, you know what? Okay, we trust this guy. If Capernaum was good, if there was thousands, Gadara is going to be 1,000,000 times better. There's going to be tens of thousands. So they were all excited. So now they finally sail across. They come up to the shore, and this is what they find. Then they sailed to the country of the Gadareans, which is opposite of Galilee. And when they stepped out of the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time, and he wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but in the tombs. That is not the welcoming committee they were expecting, okay? They come across and they pull up to the shore, and I'm going to call this guy he had legions, 99 demons in him. I'm going to call him Crazy Phil. I just think his name was Phil. We're going to go with that. So Crazy Phil, butt naked, flapping out in the wind. He's just sitting there. He's the welcoming crew, okay? Welcome to Gadara. There's Crazy Phil. This is a horrible, horrible way to welcome to Gadara. But this is what they find. They're expecting it to be amazing because of how good Capernaum was. Gadara must be even better. And this is what they find. They find Crazy Naked Phil. What a story. So, of course, we know this. Jesus casts out the demons. They go into the pigs. The people come up. They're freaked out. They're scared. Jesus, thanks for coming. It's been a whole lot of fun. You killed a bunch of pigs, saved us that trouble, but we really need you to leave. Thank you. Bye-bye. So Jesus, being compassionate, loving, caring, he says, okay. He doesn't force himself. He says, okay. And so now, as he's leaving, then the whole multitude of the surrounding region of the Gadareans, they asked him to depart, for they were seized with fear. And he got into the boat and he returned. But now the man, Crazy Phil, from whom the demons had departed, begged him that he might stay with him, or that he might leave with him. Crazy Phil said, Jesus, you set me free. For the first time in my life, I'm free. All I want to do is follow you. I just want to give my whole life to you and be with you. And Jesus said, no. He actually told the man, sent him away saying, return to your own house and tell what great things God has done. And he, or Crazy Phil, went his way and proclaimed throughout the whole city what great things Jesus had done for him. Guys, in this story, the Gadareans were scared of Jesus. They were afraid of him. They could not accept him, and they definitely did not think that he was the Messiah at that moment. But what they could not reject and what they could not argue and what they could not dismiss was Crazy Phil. And Crazy Phil's story of what Jesus had done for him. They could not ignore Crazy Phil being possessed of 99 demons, being naked, running around the tombs. He was shackled up. It actually says he was in the tombs. He was shackled and broken free. He had done some pretty nasty stuff. They could not argue with that because they knew who he was and they now saw who he is. And they could not argue with his story. It also reminds me of a story of a woman, a Samaritan woman, that Jesus goes out of his way to go to her. And he finds this woman at a well. And what's important about this is Samaritans and Jews, they hated each other. I mean, there was a big, big hatred for each other. To give you an idea, the Jews actually had a word for the Samaritans that was like the N word today, and it meant half human. It was a huge racial slur, and they hated each other. So in a Jew's eyes, the Samaritan was half of a human. Then you take the fact that she was a woman, and she was even half of that, because in those days, women were a lot of times property. But this woman was even lower than that. She had been with several men, and she was, we'll call her loose, a loose woman. And she had been with many men. She was an outcast. The reason why she was even there in the heat of the day, it says in the 6th hour, that's right about noon. They would measure time from when the sun came up till this time the sun came down. So this was around noon to 1 o'clock. The absolute heat of the day is when that woman was there getting water. Why? Because she was a pariah even to the other women. So here is a woman who's half of a human because she's Samaritan. She was half of a human, or even half of that because she was a woman, and even lower than that because of her lifestyle. And that's exactly who Jesus went to. And Jesus said, I bring you living water. And that Samaritan woman went back to her people, went back to her town, and it actually said that the entire town accepted Christ. They would accept the story from her when they would never accept Jesus. But they could not ignore her story because they knew who she was and they now saw who she is. It's powerful. And the last one is there was a blind guy who'd been blind from birth. And Jesus goes up and has pity on him, looks down and says, do you want to be healed? Well, of course I do. I've been blind my whole life. And Jesus says, okay. He picks up some dirt, he spits in it, which was a huge, in that culture in those days, would have been a huge form of disrespect. And yet Jesus did it to show, I actually respect you as a person. He spits in it, makes mud, and rubs it on the guy's eyes. And the man who has been blind his entire life could now see. And the Pharisees bring him in, and they say, you have to say that Jesus was a blasphemer because he healed you on the Sabbath. And the man said, of a blasphemer, I know not. All I know is once I was blind, and now I see. His story. Guys, the power of story in your life is so incredibly powerful. Story is how people that rejected Jesus later accepted him through someone else's story. There was times in people that rejected God in the flesh, but they could not reject the story of what he did in people's lives. Your story is so incredibly powerful. And why is that? One, because it's unique. It's your story. And I can't even tell you how many guys have come up to me and said, Trey, nobody cares about my story. Man, I'm no one special. I'm not a pastor. I'm no one really. My story doesn't mean much. Bull. And I'll prove it to you. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, multi-billion-dollar industry of social media is absolutely nothing more than a platform to share story. People are hungry for story, and it is how you can reach people for Jesus with yours. Next, people can argue theology. They can't argue your story. Guys, the church can't even agree on theology. There's 50,000 different churches that all believe something a little different. Man, people love that. Even inside the church, we love to argue theology. The world loves to pick at it, but they can't argue your story. What Jesus has done for you in your life isn't theology. It's your story, and it's the redeeming power of Jesus, and that's powerful. And lastly, because there's people that know you that don't know God. God has put you in a unique place with your story to reach people for him that don't know him, but they know you. There's incredible power in your story. And I want to prove it to you by sharing my story. So my wife and I have been married 21 years, and it is in absolutely no way, shape, or form because we've done everything right. Very, very shortly after getting married, and I'm talking within weeks, I thought I married the wrong person, which led me down a porn affair, which led me down a porn addiction. It led me to multiple affairs. It led me to being a workaholic and just seeking all kinds of validation for the world. And in 2010, I'm walking out on my wife and my 3 sons for another woman. And I'm losing my job because this other woman I had worked with and the employer had found out. I was a financial advisor and made a very healthy 6-figure income, over $250,000 a year. I had so many things that the world said would make me happy. Motorcycle, boat house, or lake house, boat, sea-doos, all the stuff that the world said would make you happy, will make you happy, make you happy. And yet one night, I find myself in a little house with a gun in my hand, saying, God, I have screwed this up beyond any hope of repair. And my only prayer at that moment, my prayer that night was, God, just don't let this bullet keep me out of heaven. That was my prayer. And God began to speak to me, and he basically asked me a few questions. He said, am I enough? Am I enough? And when I could finally work through some things in my own heart and in my life, I finally got to the point that I said, yes, God, you're enough. And he said, then put the gun down, let's move on, and let's do things different. And what I can tell you today is that from the power of that story, my wife and I are not still just together and married, but in a marriage that should have no intimacy, we have more intimacy than we ever had. In a marriage that should have no trust whatsoever, there's deeper trust than what we ever thought was possible. In a marriage that shouldn't even be together, God is using us to actually help other couples who have gone through affairs, to strengthen them, rebuild them, and have a God-honoring message. Guys, story is powerful. And I just want to let you know, your story is powerful. So many times as guys, we feel so inadequate. We don't feel like we have what it takes to be a husband. We feel like we may not have what it takes to be a father. We feel like we don't have what it takes to be a provider. Guys, what I'm here to tell you is all you need is your story. Share your story with those around you and trust God for the rest. He'll take care of it. Thank you. So guys, you heard my story. Now is the best part of the Rock. This is when we actually want to hear your story. So now you're going to get around your tables, and I want you to kind of go over some of these questions together as a group. 1, what good things has God done for you in your life? Who do you think needs to hear about your story? And what I really want to challenge you on that one is the first person that God puts on your mind, I want to challenge you within the next week or two to go share your story with that person. Number 3, do you believe that God can use your story? A lot of you, if you're being honest inside, you may say, I really don't. That's okay. Let's talk about it. Let someone else hear your story. This is a great time here at these tables. And what I think you're going to be surprised, you're going to find out your story is going to touch people's lives more than you realize. Number 4, share a story about someone you know that has impacted you. One way that God can work, and I've actually had some friends, they've shared my story with other people. It doesn't even always have to be your story. You don't have to have a story about every single situation. When the more stories you hear and you kind of put in your heart, God can use those to minister to other people. They can take your story, but He can also use others' story through you. And lastly, why did that story impact you? If there's a story in your life that's really made a difference, find out why. What about that story impacted you? And then begin to ask God to reveal those things to you, and then take those same things and begin to share those same impactful points with other men and other people in your life. Guys, thank you so much. God bless.